All right, guys, this is part 2 of your Protestant Reformation flipped classroom. We left our discussions on Catholics and Protestant beliefs, so we're going to switch here to John Calvin. So, John Calvin, similarly to Martin Luther, Calvin is another becomes a Protestant holy man, and he's a French lawyer, and he helps to organize Protestant churches in Europe, specifically in Switzerland. His ideas become known as Calvinism. They're a lot stricter than Martin Luther's. His followers are going to believe in hard work and prayer, as well as predestination. So Calvinism is about predestination, where God is going to determine your fate, right? God has a plan for you, less of a reliance on free will. The Bible is still going to be a religious source of truth. People are going to read, interpret it themselves. And a lot of Calvinists are going to find themselves in England or move to England, and those Calvinists become known as Puritans. So we have Calvinists all over, pockets in Germany and Switzerland, but in England they become known as Puritans. Another branch or another type of Protestantism is Huguenots. Now, Huguenots are a branch of Calvinism. They are centered in France. They are referred to as the Reformed Church of France sometimes, even today. And not lots of negative things happen to the Huguenots living in French. They have a really big conflict with Catholics living there in the late 16th century, 1562 to 1598. And it eventually is going to result in an uneasy truce, meaning no one wins, no one loses, but it's very bloody between the Catholics and the Protestants fighting over religion in France. Now, religion in world history is very, very important. Most people across world history have been extremely religious in their beliefs, and they're willing to go to war with it, as we've seen with the Crusades and now with the French Wars of Religion. This image here is a massacre on St. Bartholomew's Day in 1572, and almost 10,000 Huguenots are killed. So again, tensions are high during the French Wars of Religion between Protestants and Catholics in the 16th century France. So what happens kind of after all of this occurs, after Martin Luther and John Calvin and the Huguenots and all of this stuff goes down, the Pope, the leader of the Catholic Church, initiates what's called the Council of Trent. And he finally starts to address some of the problems that the Catholic Church is having, specifically the corruption, the indulgences, right, the sale of remission of sins, and these financial abuses or selling of church positions. So the Council of Trent is called to by the Pope. Eventually what happens is the Catholic Church is going to end the sale of indulgences. They find that it's very unfair. And it's kind of what started the Protestant Reformation in the first place. They're going to uphold the belief in salvation being achieved through faith and works, right? Works being the deeds you do, charity, donation, right? Prayer, pilgrimage, and having faith in one God as well. They're going to reaffirm the 7 sacraments, which we will talk about in class: baptism, Holy Communion, penance, confirmation, holy matrimony, holy orders, and anointing of the sick. All of kind of the steps you take as a member of the Catholic Church. One of them, actually, I am going to be taking part of next November. See if you can guess which one it is. So in England, right, that's kind of mainland Europe. In England, lots of stuff is going on in the early 16th century. The King of England at the time, King Henry VIII now, is married to a woman, Catherine of Aragon. And they're going to have 6 children. And King Henry VIII, his image is here. He is the King of England from 1509 to 1547. But unfortunately, of his 6 kids, only one of them, a daughter, Mary, is going to survive childhood. So what does that mean for King Henry VIII? Well, it means that he doesn't have an heir to his throne. And at this point, Catherine's nephew, Charles V, is actually the Emperor of Spain. Right? Again, kings and queens are leading Europe's governments and politics at this point. Still kind of a medieval idea. that we will eventually start to see diminish, but still we have this rise of kings and queens, continuing on these bigger empires, England, France, the Holy Roman Empire, right? We still see those in power. And Catherine and obviously Charles V don't want to lose power, right? They have this alliance with each other. But Henry VIII wants to have a son, and he wants to marry a woman by the name of Anne Boleyn. So what he does is he asks the Pope to annul his marriage. Annul meaning basically cancel, make it seem as though it never happened. But the Pope says no. So Henry VIII does it anyway. He marries Anne and leaves the Catholic Church. And he's going to form what's called the Church of England. And eventually King Henry VIII is going to marry 6 more times until he has a son. Right? So the Church of England is still today the major Protestant church in the United Kingdom. Again, an image of King Henry VIII. And what happens is violence ensues. So King Henry VIII is going to strengthen the Church of England. He has a son, Edward VI, but Edward VI is going to die in his teens. So Henry VIII's daughter, Mary here, who survives childhood, is going to take the throne. And she is going to attempt to restore Catholicism in England. And what she does is she tortures and burns hundreds of Protestants at the stake. Again, very similar to the religious wars in France between Huguenots and Catholics. Protestants are going to face persecution. And Mary becomes known as Bloody Mary, which is where we get the name of the drink. And eventually these groups of people, right, these Protestants living in England, are going to look for religious freedom. And they're going to do so across the Atlantic Ocean in the Americas, right? The Puritans specifically, as I mentioned before, are going to leave England. And we'll dive into that a little bit later. Mary eventually is going to die, and her half-sister Elizabeth is going to take over. And Elizabeth is much more moderate and tolerant of those, both Catholics and Protestants. So this is a breakdown of all of the religions in Europe during the 16th century. At this point, obviously, we still have Judaism. Jews are still being persecuted at this time all over Europe. And then Christianity, we have this breakdown. Obviously, if I have a third arrow here, it would say Orthodox. And we have our Catholics, our Great Schism happens in the 11th century, but we have Protestantism start to develop. It's going to split into multiple branches or multiple types, as we can see here. Calvinists in Switzerland, they're going to break off into Huguenots in France. We obviously have Lutheranism by the foundings of Martin Luther. And really, all of these are an offset of the ideas of Luther. Right? Without Martin Luther, without his 95 Thesis, none of this is going to happen. We have the Church of England, and obviously in England, with King Henry VIII, which becomes known as Anglicanism, and then we're going to have a offset of the Puritans, who are going to look for that religious freedom in the New World. So by the end of the Renaissance and the Reformation, there's a lot of religious conflicts. Some of them are being restored, but it's going to throw Europe in this long reign of turmoil between all of these different religions. Finally, our map, just this image kind of blown up or viewed as a map. We still have our Catholics in Spain and Portugal and Italy, very Catholic areas even today. But now we have our Church of England, right? Anglicanism in southern England. We have our Calvinists in the Netherlands, parts of Germany, these pockets in Switzerland. And then we have Lutheranism in northern Germany, right? Wittenberg we see here, where Martin Luther spends some time in that castle developing his faith, and then in the Scandinavian countries. So again, lots of different countries, or religions in these countries, modern day countries. We also see our Huguenot centers, in southern France. So that is the Protestant Reformation, an overview, an extremely, extremely influential event in world history. Thank you, guys.